people of the internet, and welcome to another review for the Kaiju Noir channel. My name is Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir, of course, and here with me for technically not our first collaboration, but really the first time making his first appearance on the Kaiju Noir channel. Give it up for kaiju thriller author and publisher Matt Dennion.
Hey, thank you for having me again on, Andres. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. For those who don't know, Matt Dennion, or Matthew Dennion, as you go by professionally,
yes.
You are an author of several kaiju thriller fiction, such as Chimera, Scourge of the Gods, Operation Rock, Polar Yeti, and especially your most famous claim to fame, Atomic Rex. Am I right?
Yes, Atomic Rex and the sequel, Atomic Rex, Wrath of the Polar Yeti. I've also just released my newest novel, Kaiju Core. And like you said, just tried my hand at publishing, just put together my first kaiju anthology from a bunch of short stories people had sent to me. So that's out now, and it's called Attack of the Kaiju. And as you know, and hope your fans do too, I do a lot of work with GFan. So I've been working mainly on their GFantis versus Guest Monster series for them. So aside from my monsters, we had Chris Martinez's Doragon appear, Jeremy Robinson's Nemesis, Timothy Price's Big in Japan, just to name a few. And we've put that all out as a free ebook, which you can find on Smashwords, and you can download it to Kindle or download an EPUB or a PDF, whatever you want there. But it's free for all kaiju fans, so please go check it out.
Sounds very, very excellent. Yeah. And the reason I mentioned at the beginning that this isn't technically our first collaboration is because a couple months back during the holidays, Matt and I sat down to record an episode or a future episode of the Shoe Watch podcast. Yeah. Where we go into detail about all of Matt Dennion's experience with writing, his influences, the things that led to his creative spark, the inspiration behind his creative spark, and all that good stuff. We did talk about certain subjects that have changed a bit over time in the following months. So, would you care to update for future listeners of that interview, what has happened with certain projects that we went into detail in the recording? Yes,
a particular one would be the project I'm working on with Chris Martinez and Doragon. We had planned to put that into GFan magazine. It's just going to be a short 5-page comic that's going to have Atomic Rex taking on Doragon, and we definitely put the Doragon type of spin on there, so it's a very fun metafiction type story, almost like if there was a movie made between the two characters, sort of how the movie would look as it was being filmed. So it was a lot of fun. I know a lot of your fans know Chris and his work, and it's just a blast anytime you get to work with him. So anyway, yeah, we're going to be releasing that as another free digital comic, hopefully very soon. Chris is working hard on it, and Kaiju Noir himself is going to help us do a motion comic for that we hope to have up on his YouTube channel. So please stay tuned for that and see how it works out.
Yes, it'll be the greatest audio experience since Orson Welles' narration of The Chateau.
Yeah, so you have such a great Orson Welles voice. I can do Bob Dylan, but people don't want to hear Bob Dylan reading a comic. So
of course, they want to hear the voice of Orson Welles. Yes, the greatest filmmaker, the Citizen Kane of Citizen Kane films and film directors.
Imagine what would you prefer, like Orson Welles reading Atomic Rex versus Doragon, or would you prefer to read like Drunken Orson Welles?
Oh, Drunken Orson Welles, definitely. Because it's a Doragon story. We have to do Drunken Orson Welles.
Yeah. We live in a remote farm in Lincolnshire. There,
you're like, cut Orson, that's the wrong one.
Leave me alone. There's too much directing here. If they knew me, if they were familiar with my body of work, they would have let me write the script.
Sure, it would come out better.
Rosebud.
So let's get on with our review for Kong Skull Island, now that introductions are out of the way. So, Matt, I guess before we begin, I know I just said that with the review, last with most of my reviews, I like to ask my guest how familiar they are with the source material, or in this case, what has been your past experiences with King Kong. Now, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with this character, am I right?
Yeah.
I mean, I know he might be a little bit obscure.
I've heard of him. I had to do some research. And it was difficult to come across. No, seriously, huge Kong fan throughout my entire life. The original Kong, I think, is maybe the greatest movie ever made, honestly. So I've seen every Kong movie from the great ones like the original up through King Kong Lives as a down point. And as you know, Kong has influenced a lot of my writing.
Oh, yeah.
Including, I think when we did the past interview, like you said, you were reading Chimera, put it down to go watch Kong because it reminded you so much of that. And
absolutely.
And Polar Yeti is a very heavy Kong influence too. Obviously, I wanted to do a Kong book, couldn't, but Yetis are in the public domain, so that worked out well there too. But
I mean, hey, there's totally nothing wrong. In fact, it's totally right to take something you love and just make it into like an original product.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, not only do you have creative freedom, but you can be monetarily compensated for it.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm very well versed in everything Kong, including some of his terrible cartoons and some of his very good comic books. So I feel like I've got a good knowledge base going forward with this.
I guess just like you and many other individuals, I grew up watching the original 1933 King Kong, very influential for the young kaiju noir back in the early 90s. I pretty much saw Kong around the same time I saw Godzilla. I'm not sure which one I saw first. Maybe possibly saw Kong and Jurassic Park around that same time because I was, obsessed with dinosaurs, which eventually led to my discovery of Godzilla. And since then, I have watched Son of Kong, King Kong versus Godzilla, King Kong Escapes. I was never as I never saw the 70s and 80s Dino De Laurentiis Kongs until like when I was in high school.
Okay.
So I don't have as much of a connection to those movies as other people have. I know for like my mother, she loves the 1976 Kong. So, that was like her generation's Kong.
Right.
And I did watch the Peter Jackson Kong in theaters, which I do have. As flawed as it is at points, I do really, really love that version.
Yeah.
And I guess my low point for the Kong franchise would probably be the most recent Netflix animated series, Kong King of the Apes.
Yeah, that's pretty low. I would agree with that.
Oh yeah,
that was bottom of the barrel.
Thankfully, I have never seen. I've only seen snippets of the Rankin Bass King Kong cartoon, but again, never had much exposure to that. I never had exposure to the '90s cartoon Kong. What was that show called?
I think
Kong
it was...
King of something.
Hold on one second. I think I have it here.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah, shows how big a fan I am. It's just called Kong the Animated Series. Kong the.
Oh okay. Kong the Animated Series. Okay, yeah. I never saw...
I just have it to round out my collection.
Right. I just so happen to have the Kong the Animated Series right here with me, just in case a random person in Japan were to ask about that particular series. Yeah. Like Batman, you're always prepared.
Right.
And I did recently, because my friends Bill and Dylan, aka Zazubar and Super DM64 on YouTube, they recently did a series of commentaries on every single Kong movie, and because I decided to watch their commentaries along with the movies that they were commentating on, that's what led me to listen to them and watch the two animated Kong movies, which was Kong King of Atlantis and Kong Return to the Jungle, which were continuations of Kong the Animated Series.
Yes.
And both were pretty awful.
Yeah, they really are. They really are.
But, so yeah, Kong has had quite a tumultuous history, many highs, many lows. He's just this character, I guess thanks to the weird legal loopholes and situations, everybody has had their hands on the Kong character. And which brings us to today, where we are talking about the most recent incarnation, the Warner Brothers Monsterverse incarnation of King Kong, where we see this movie, which is supposedly, or it was originally announced as an origin story for Kong, or like see how Kong became king of his island. And it was initially pitched as like an adaptation of what was it? That story, Kong King of Skull Island, which was, I believe, a book turned into a comic.
Yes, which is very good if you haven't read it, by the way.
Oh yeah, I haven't read the book, but I have read the comic, Kong,
Okay.
King of Skull Island,
Yeah.
where it starts off as like a sequel to the 33 movie with Carl Denham's son
Yes.
going to back to Los Angeles, Skull Island, and from there he learns about the history of Kong and
Yes.
his rivalry with like the monster Gaul, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. But unfortunately, for whatever reason, that is not the movie we got.
Right.
For whatever reason, things changed along the way. We didn't get so much an origin story, but rather just a fun island escapist monster movie that was essentially just like take the island portion of the original King Kong mythos and just turn that into the movie.
Yes.
Just a bunch of explorers. They go to Skull Island in search of information, and eventually they get more than what they bargained for and find themselves running for their lives against all the creatures of Skull Island. Of Skull Island. Meanwhile, we have some characters that have a vendetta against Kong, and some characters that learn to appreciate the importance of Kong's existence.
Yes.
So, going into this movie, what were your or coming out of this movie? What have been your initial thoughts so far? What were like the first impressions of the film?
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it's just really a fun movie. In that it's very action packed from start to finish. I compared it as a more favorable Jurassic World, where like Jurassic World's fun, but there's definitely a lot of plot holes. But if you don't think too much about it, you just enjoy it. I thought the same with Kong. I also thought one thing that was very good that I think the company did is take a look at what didn't work with Godzilla 2014 and perhaps even with Shin Godzilla as well. And don't get me wrong, I really like both films. But I think one of the biggest complaints in both Godzilla 2014 and Shin Godzilla is that there really wasn't a whole lot of monster time on the screen, which if you're watching Kong is not a problem. Like there's Kong is on there a good amount of the time in broad daylight, and he's always doing something pretty much action bound. So for the most part, I thoroughly enjoyed the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also got that same impression, not just from the trailers, but from word of mouth, and especially when I finally viewed the film itself, where it looks like the Legendary was really learning from their taking notes when sawing the reviews for Godzilla 2014.
Yeah.
As much as I still enjoy that movie, I do admit it's got a serious problem, mostly in the fact that despite the movie being called Godzilla and advertised as Godzilla, the story itself is not really about Godzilla.
Right. He's just kind of there.
Yeah. They pulled a late Showa era 70s Godzilla movie like Megalon or Gigan, where Godzilla's just kind of like this Deus Ex Machina who shows up at the very end just to clean up the mess, and it's like, there we go, job's done. I'm gonna go back home. But for this movie, it's like Kong. He is front and center. He definitely outshines everything else in the movie.
Yes.
And like you said, right from the very get-go, they show you Kong in all his magnificent, hairy glory.
Yeah.
And they do show different aspects of Kong's life. Also, kind of similar to like the Peter Jackson version, where you kind of see, like, take a look at the, like a peek at the daily life of Kong. We see him strolling about, strutting stuff. Getting into tangling with enemies that other creatures that wish to, challenge him. We see him act very docile towards the inhabitants of Skull Island and the more peaceful creatures. It's very fascinating just looking at this creature behave and act the way that he does. So I'm really glad that in terms of the character, they really paid a lot of respect in terms of how they portrayed him.
Yeah, and speaking of the portrayal too, I thought his actual physical appearance, I like too. Like you said, I really like the Peter Jackson King Kong. But when you watch that movie, he definitely just looks like a big gorilla in terms of like he's got the hands on the ground, forward-walking stance. And in this Kong, he's got more of a, what I call like the Sasquatch stance, where he's straight up. Or more like Man in a Suit-ish, which is kind of like a nice nod to all of the previous Kong movies. Like going back, I think with the exception of Peter Jackson's, every other Kong has pretty much been an upright walking Kong. Even the original one, even the longer arms, pretty much walked upright. And then, of course, all the times that suits were used in like King Kong versus Godzilla, King Kong Escapes, King Kong Lives, the 76 Kong, it's always been like the upright looking Kong. And I think that will translate better as we go more into the Monsterverse that he's standing upright.
Right. It definitely helps him have a much higher stature compared to his other, to his future co-stars. And does give him a great presence.
Yes.
Makes him feel like look more very strong, powerful, very confident individual. And it also helps him stand out as a monster, like as you mentioned. The Peter Jackson version was simply just a big gorilla, whereas with this one, he is a brand new species, so there's a lot of creative liberties with how he acts and behaves. And so it does make for a very intimidating figure, especially when you see him, he rises from the shadows. You see him, his silhouette against the sun. And you just, you could tell, you just see the look and terror of like everybody's faces. They're like, what is that? And there's also something there's something very effective about having a more humanoid monster, because I always felt that if you want to make a monster scary, I think perhaps like one of the most scariest monsters are the kind that remind you of something that is human but is not quite human.
Yes.
It's like you're looking into a dark reflection of yourself, and that's why I always kind of thought like let's say a random piece of property entertainment like Attack on Titan. Attack on Titan. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the anime.
Yes, right.
But like the Titans themselves, they're just like giant naked human creatures that act like zombies, have these like very disturbing grins on their faces. And so there's nothing more frightening than to see something that looks human but is nowhere near human.
Right.
And so maybe there's a way, it's sort of like a psychological or instinctual fear of something that's familiar but not quite familiar. That to be seen in like Kong being like having a more upright human-like posture. In fact, I went to see it the first time, so I'm going twice already, with a friend of mine who's a psychologist, and he had said that there's really two types of monsters, and it's the monsters that we create and the monsters that we are. And he said Kong does a very good, especially in this version, portraying kind of the monsters that we are. Like you just said very adequately, he's almost human, but not quite. And one thing about this movie, I felt like they did a pretty good job of capturing kind of that almost human aspect of Kong. And I like for a few key examples. So just so your viewers are watching, can we give out some spoilers at this point or give the warning? Let's see. I think as long as we avoid the climax, I think, and any like character fates, I think we'll be good.
Okay, so
I mean, we could save like the major spoilers at the very end. Especially when we talk about the post-credit sequence, because there is, ladies and gentlemen. So
this isn't really a spoiler, but they do a really good job of showing how intelligent Kong is. And this is a really spoiler because like they do show it in one preview. He actually utilizes weapons.
Oh yeah, I don't think we ever saw that in the Peter Jackson version outside of like rocks.
Right, and this one it's
maybe he like bashes a V-Rex with a boulder, but other than that, this is a much more this Kong has a much more complex style of fighting, and I think it really sets him apart from what we've seen with Legendary's Godzilla.
Absolutely, in fact. I could almost hear talking about, and this is one thing this movie did well too, is a lot of throwbacks to previous Kong movies. The Dr. Johnson in the American version of King Kong versus Godzilla saying Kong is a thinking animal, as he's utilizing his
brain is much larger than this gorilla's. Well, Godzilla's is the size of a marble.
But it really, doing things like that really humanized the character, even more so than I feel he's been in previous incarnations. So, and one more key thing for your audience, too, I think, is that, we had John Goodman and Sam Jackson and Brie Larson and Tom Hiddleston and lots of big actors, but Kong truly is the star of this movie.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it does feel like the actors do take a backseat to Kong. And if in a way, it kind of reminds me a lot. I get the feeling that the filmmakers were going for a very retro monster B movie style of filmmaking here, where the special effects are front and center, kind of like what I would like to imagine, like 1950s atomic age monster movie, like Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, Them, or Earth versus the Flying Saucers, or, you know, even to that extent, any Ray Harryhausen film,
Yes.
where the monsters are always like front and center, while the characters, they provide an adequate job at moving the plot along. However, that kind of, because of that style of filmmaking, you kind of end up with very basic characters. However, I feel like the way this movie approached things was they decided, okay, because these characters are rather basic, let's get some very charismatic and energetic actors who can make these characters more memorable with their natural talents,
Yes.
perhaps.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct on that. The actors, I feel like, went in there knowing that they weren't going to have a whole lot to work with, but were able to accept that, okay, I'm playing basically a trope in this film as one kind or the other, but they did a good job of portraying that trope. And it worked out, I think, much better than... and again, I don't mean to knock because I like the movie, but in Godzilla 2014, where we follow Taylor Johnson's character throughout,
right,
I think he does a pretty good job. But I'm much more interested to see what Godzilla was doing. In this film, it's very much the reverse. We have very good actors who don't eat up a lot of screen time, and none of their characters get overly developed. Although I was surprised at how good I thought John C. Reilly did in this film.
Yeah. He was probably the most sympathetic character in the movie.
Yes.
And you would have thought that by a trailer, judging by the trailers alone, he would have been simply comic relief.
Exactly.
But rather, a lot of attention gets focused on him to be not the comic relief, but like the main focal point of the movie. Like, he draws a lot of your sympathy, being a character who has been lost to the sands of time, has been kind of forgotten about.
Yes.
He's been left to his own devices on Skull Island, and he's very detached from the world. And it's always interesting seeing like how much he's realized the world has changed since World War II, and how very different America is and the world is and the Cold War is right now. By the way, speaking of which, I do want to say briefly comment that I love the choice of the time period for this movie.
Yes.
And it's a very unique time period because the only time periods of films we ever got of Kong were movies that were made as a throwback to the original.
Right.
Like Peter Jackson's version, or another animated movie that I forgot to bring up, The Mighty Kong, if anyone remembers that.
But yeah, I totally agree. It was a great timepiece for it. And this, again, not really a spoiler. It's set at the very tail end of the Vietnam War. And the whole movie has a very Apocalypse Now type feel to it. Yeah, which
love the color palette, by the way, of this for this movie.
Yes, yeah. And that comes across very well. And Sam Jackson's character in particular, you can see his motivations for what he's doing because of his experiences in Vietnam.
He's probably like one of the more complex characters.
Yes.
Perhaps like maybe like as complex, as complex, if not more so, than John C. Reilly's character.
Yes. With
I believe his character's name was Packard, I believe.
Yeah.
So with let's see, I want to sure if it was like what was his rank in the film, but for Sam Jackson's character as Preston Packard, he appears to be a character who has been very much so mentally scarred by the Vietnam War.
Yes.
Being that at this point in time, America was just starting to pull out its troops from that country, and it was at that point where like America and its soldiers were kind of put to shame. A lot of the Vietnam veterans, this was a time where they were left in a very a very large state of confusion. Something that's perfectly reflected in a movie like First Blood, Sylvester Stallone's First Blood.
Exactly, I think the same. Yep.
Where you have these kind of like lost souls who have no idea or no direction or nowhere to go with their lives, after experiencing something like that. And unlike the soldiers of World War II, who were met with open arms, open, loving, welcoming arms, the Vietnam veterans never really experienced anything like that. And so you could see a bit of that sort of development going on in Sam Jackson's mind, especially where it's established early on that Packard's character is someone who doesn't really have anything to look forward to back home.
Right.
In a way, he still feels like he has unfinished business. He still feels the need. He feels embarrassed. He feels like demasculinized, if that's a real word.
Yeah. We'll make it.
Yeah, we'll make it work. It feels like he has been, his pride has been shattered after the Vietnam War, and so having been embarrassed and humiliated again by Kong, he kind of projects all his built-up rage and anguish and anger and hatred from his experiences in the war and projects it onto Kong and uses him as an external means of dealing with his issues, to the point where he goes on a self-destructive path for both him and his men.
It's a very Captain Ahab-like story.
Definitely.
Engages in, where he just becomes obsessed with doing it. And Jackson does a really good job, I thought, in that role. Again, nothing, I don't think someone Oscar for it or anything, but he did a good job with what he was given to do in that role. So...
And it does feel very natural. You can tell he does have a lot of respect and a lot of sympathy for his fellow men. I mean, even when he first meets, I'm blanking out on his name. John C. Reilly's character. He recognizes him as a fellow soldier. And he also even initially tries to make his plan about let's rescue our missing guy.
Yes.
And then once he's out of the picture, by that point, it's like, okay, now we're not just rescuing someone. Let's just go out and try to kill this big monkey.
And I also thought it was very brief, but the interactions between John C. Reilly and Packard, the Sam Jackson character, were interesting in that you're looking at one man who let his war go, and John C. Reilly's character and come to peace with like himself, and they alluded to the fact that he'd become friends with his enemy at the time. They did, and that was really interesting. And quick side note, I was just reading today that the director of Kong is pitching sort of like a prequel focused solely on John C. Reilly's character and his time on the island.
That would be very interesting.
I agree. I think that'd be very cool. So I'm hoping that that comes together. So he was just I just saw that on the news feed today that was something he's pushing for. I think it'd be a great entry into the Monsterverse.
It would be an interesting sequel and an interesting way of further developing this timeline. Maybe we'll finally get Gaw in that movie.
Yeah, I'm thinking you might, because if you look at kind of, I think Kong is slightly older in this film than he would have been in the Gaw film, because if I remember back, it's Gaw that actually kills Kong's parents in that book. Now, certainly allude to the fact that it's the skull crawlers in this film, but maybe they could just backtrack it some to where it was Gaw. I mean, it's not like they would know for 100% sure what killed Kong's parents.
True, yeah. Let's see. There was one thing I wanted to bring up, but unfortunately it escaped my mind at this point. But so you mentioned the skull crawlers. So I think what were your thoughts on the rest of the creature designs and their roles in the story for this film?
I did like the skull crawlers in particular because, again, they're a nod back to, and I could not find the creature's name, but in the Kong 33, there's the scene of what looks like a very early attempt at a skull crawler crawling out of the spider pit sequence. So that's kind of a nice nod. Those animals worked well in that they kind of had a serpentine type movement to them, and it's kind of a tradition that Kong takes on some kind of a serpent in all of his films. In 30, 76, King Kong Escapes, he pretty much does that. And I thought that they were pretty horrific too in terms of their appearance. I certainly felt like they borrowed some from the Indominus Rex from Jurassic World. Kind of when you look at them, the way that they moved, and certainly their coloring seemed to do a lot for that. But I mean, that was cool. I thought the Indominus is one of the highlights of Jurassic World. So that was good. The water buffaloes were kind of interesting. We don't really get a whole lot of mammalian monsters in these kaiju movies. So they were kind of neat. not in there a whole lot, but when you see them, they're kind of cool. And you don't really see it a whole lot, but and I'm not doing a spoiler because it's in a trailer, but the octopus or giant squid was a great throwback to
Oh, yeah.
Godzilla.
Odako finally got his grand return.
Yeah, it's about time.
Along with Kumanga, unofficially for both of them.
Yes, I thought the spider did very well with the way that he attacked and everything.
Using camouflage among the bamboo.
Yes. I thought that was great, the way that they had portrayed that. So I thought the monsters were all very good. It was also interesting they had kind of like the smaller threat with the pterosaur monsters. I'm not sure exactly.
Oh, yeah. Right. And it's also really cool. Like at the first, when you see an up-close shot of them, you see these like very sharp barbs and spikes on their bills, and you quickly find out what those things are for.
Yeah. It almost looked like a pterodactyl with like a sawfish head or something.
Yeah. Although it's really funny, this was something that was pointed out to me by Denny Roth, who with the Denny Roth, he is a friend of mine who was also in the G-Fest Artist Alley. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him.
Yeah, he did the work on the Atomic Rex Kadoja story that's coming out soon in G-Fan for me. The art.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did the artwork before Chris did the inks on them.
Yes.
So Denny Roth, he pointed out to me about that scene from Jurassic World where a bunch of those pteranodons are like picking up all those people and eating them. And he mentioned how like because Denny Roth has a background in paleontology, he mentioned how kind of unrealistic it is for creatures that small and frail to start picking on something much bigger than them. And it's really funny because they did the same thing here, and that seems to be a common trope, I guess, in dinosaur movies. Just have a bunch of pterodactyls picking up people.
What I think, and this came across between both movies again, and I keep going back to it, but comparing it to Jurassic World, is that I had to look this up. Derek Connolly was one of the main writers for both Jurassic World and Kong Skull Island. So
Interesting.
Yeah, Derek Connolly, that's it. So I think that his influence is showing over both. Now I'm not sure exactly how much he was involved with either one. He was one of the head writers, but I feel like that the pacing of the two movies, very similar characters with like Chris Pratt and Tom Hiddleston's characters holding down similar roles, and kind of the way he did it with the pterodactyls and with the skull crawlers and the Indominus having some similarities that I think that's why there are quite a lot of similarities between the two. In fact, I came home and watched Jurassic World and was like, yeah, this is a very similar feel to both of these movies after you watch them.
Yeah, although I feel like in some cases, I think Kong Skull Island works better than Jurassic World.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I think it was another case of looking at what did work in one film and what didn't, and then improving upon what did. In fact, I think one of the things I really liked most about Kong Skull Island is it really does seem like a monster film made for the fans. I don't know if you feel or not, too.
Yeah, I do definitely feel that. This was definitely aimed at a specific demographic.
Yeah. I
want to say it's the same demographic for people who enjoyed a movie like Pacific Rim.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where Pacific Rim certainly wasn't trying to be a game changer. It wasn't trying to test the limits on what you can or can't do with storytelling or special effects. It just wanted to say, hey, I'm making this love letter to this genre that I love.
Yes.
Using a bunch of familiar tropes. And it wasn't so much like unoriginal. People could say that it's technically unoriginal, but in a way, I see it as more of homage. And I think we talked a little bit about that in our interview.
Yes.
Yeah, like where do you draw the line between homage and being straight up unoriginal?
Yes.
And I feel like Pacific Rim was a movie that just wanted to cater towards fans of giant monster movies, while also having not taking itself seriously, but at the same time, it's not taking itself too seriously, but at the same time, it's not being lazy with its characters. Overall, it's just having characters that are it's self-aware enough to capitalize on the common tropes that it's emulating, while also providing a fun experience that kind of taps into that childlike sense of wonder and amazement within the audience.
Absolutely, you hit the nail right on the head, and everybody pretty much has liked this movie. Like if you checked the reviews online and stuff, and even like I took my kids to see it, they loved it. Their grandma tagged along, she loved it. You know, so because Kong is very much like a timeless character, going back to 33. Everybody knows him, like you said, and I feel like everybody who watched the movie was able to relate something to the Kong of their generation, like you had mentioned before, which I think, again, was a smart way to go about it. And the characters didn't overshadow that. They were good. Nobody overacted or none of the characters super stand out. Like you said, they're very much tropes, but they fill those roles well. So it just helps make it a fun movie. The one thing I did make a note of, I did like that Brie Larson's character had a change from the typical damsel in distress that we do see in a Kong movie. You know, like with Ann Darrow or Near Susan or Dwan from the 76 movie. They're all very much the damsels in distress, where Brie Larson's not like, a butt kicker necessarily, but she certainly can handle herself and is never like seen as a helpless female in these films.
Oh yeah, definitely. But speaking of helpless females, there was one character that really stuck out, and that was the Asian woman who was hanging around, who was really only there to give exposition alongside John Goodman's assistant in the movie. She really didn't do anything in the movie. She didn't amount to anything. And I can only assume that she was there simply to appeal to the Chinese demographic, since that has been an occurring trend in Hollywood nowadays. You just got to shove in a Chinese character in there just to appeal to China, or straight up have like scenes that take place solely in China, like in Transformers 4, or
right.
In some cases have an entire subplot involved in Iron Man 3 that's only in the Chinese version.
I was trying to think about her. The only thing I could think, other than like what you said, is she's the one character who seems she might be young enough to appear later in the Monsterverse and still be relevant. I doubt that's the case. I think.
But then again, don't we have Dr. Serizawa for that already?
Yeah, we do as like the older character. So I'm not really sure. Yeah, like you said, I think she just might be there to appeal to a certain demographic. She didn't really do anything. Like you said.
Right. Yeah. And she opened the can, I think. Yeah, maybe. She was there to give I'm really blanking on the actor and the character's name, but for John Goodman's character's assistant,
yes,
she gave him someone to talk to, and that was basically it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say like the assistant I did like his interactions with John Goodman being like the mentor and the mentor and the student, where John Goodman's character, he has been involved in Monarch for a really long time, and he's trying to prove the existence of giant monsters, which I do want to go into because I was a little confused about that.
Okay.
And by the end of the movie, his assistant sort of ends up taking over that role. If there was any mark against this movie, I would say that I really wish they kind of focus on that a bit more, because the assistant for the most part is just in the background.
Yeah,
giving exposition, and by the time the action starts coming into play, we don't really see him do anything really. Right.
And he's another one who was kind of young, and he came up with the Hollow Earth theory that was kind of like the reason he was there, which, by the way, I think is a great way to introduce new monsters. Going back to like Edgar Rice Burroughs and Jules Verne with their Hollow Earth monsters, up through certainly the Showa era. They had talked a lot about underground monsters and nuclear underground test calls and these things. So I thought that was very cool. Anyway,
he still had importance, I guess, in introducing to the audience certain aspects of this universe that play a big part later on.
Yes. Yeah, and I think it's going to be even larger, as we saw with the end credits scene, the Hollow Earth idea. So. Oh
yeah. So yeah, like even though if the assistant, he was able to provide something, whereas the woman, the other scientist woman, she didn't she didn't provide anything.
Which is, I'm
really.
sorry, which is the same true, because the two groups kind of form about the scientist who goes with Samuel L. Jackson, the Caucasian guy. He doesn't really do anything. He's just kind of there.
Right. He's just a red shirt.
Yeah.
I mean, at least that's something.
Yeah, but I feel like, why did you need a scientist to be the red shirt? You know, it could have been some other drugs. Yeah, the other guy in there.
Yeah.
So yeah,
maybe it's some like social. Maybe it's like some hidden social commentary that we're not digging deep enough into with our pretentiousness.
No, I think we're okay. We are pretentious. There's no question about that. But
yeah, totally.
Yeah, but
everybody in the audience who's listening to the video, there's like, look at these couple of assholes here.
Yeah, I get that a lot. I get that. But to get back on track, the movie was fun. I do think it did a good job of kind of laying a foundation for the Monsterverse that we didn't necessarily get a lot of in Godzilla. They kind of touched on it a little bit. And you mentioned about John Goodman's character. So, again, this is slight spoiler warning for anybody who hasn't seen it a little bit. But this is a vague reference, but I took it as that John Goodman was on the boat that originally tried to attack Godzilla. Is that what you got as well?
It's very difficult because he says he brings up the 1954 incident, saying that in 1954, 45? No, 54.
You're right.
In 1954, it was established in the 2014 movie that was the year that Godzilla made his grand appearance.
Right.
The tie-in comic Godzilla Awakening states otherwise, but I'm going to ignore that because it's a poorly written book. So in 1954, it was established that that's like the main point that Godzilla was last seen, and that a series of nuclear tests were conducted, supposedly, but in reality, Dr. Serizawa mentions that they were trying to kill something all those years ago. And so you'd think that would be like those records would be available in the government. You think like the government was aware of Godzilla and was attempting to actively pursue and exterminate him. So, but in this movie, it's, I guess, Monarch isn't aware of Godzilla, or it's like it's so secret that not even the government itself knows. Well, it's like, how are they trying? How is John Goodman trying to prove the existence of monsters when supposedly the government was already fighting monsters? Yeah,
that part was certainly slightly convoluted. So I'm fairly sure, because he mentions he was on the Wanderer, and then he talks about how he saw a monster that was just like vicious and took out everything, and they show like a picture of what certainly looks like would fit Godzilla's claws taking out the front of the Wanderer. And yet one of the opening scenes is him trying to convince the government that this is worth exploring. So now the only thing that I can, as I had to really go back and think about this, is that I think they might have been they weren't sure that Godzilla was still alive necessarily after the 54 bombing.
Okay, and they probably wouldn't have think that there are other monsters besides
Exactly, right, because it ties back into...
Again, not counting the Godzilla Awakening book, where it's established that there's a hell of a lot more monsters than him.
So just throw that out. Throw that out. If they assume that they killed Godzilla in 54, because the next time there's any kind of mention of him is in 2014, so they could definitely found that he was alive after 73 and 2014. We're talking about like almost a 40-year span there. So right. So I think that might have been the case, and that's where I think that the Hollow Earth idea comes into it, because and then again, I'm putting a lot into this, but I could see if the government said, well, here's this one aberration that we've killed, and Monarch is saying, no, there's this entire Hollow Earth filled with other monsters we need to explore, and then you're looking at a scenario where the government's already put a lot of money into Vietnam, so we have to consider this as in the Vietnam umbrella. That and they do make a comment about like, oh, you're as bad as the UFO chasers, or something like that. So I think that the government might kind of have thought that was just the one aberration, and Monarch is still trying to prove that, there's other threats out there based on what we find out later that they're aware of, at least. And I'm also not 100% sure that Monarch necessarily works directly for the U.S. government. They're certainly associated with them, but I wonder if they're not more of like a conglomeration that operates as part of the government and does their own type of thing. What did you get between the two movies on that so far?
I get the feeling that Monarch... It looks like they mentioned before that the government was on the verge of shutting down Monarch, I believe.
They do say that.
So I'm assuming that Monarch is an obscure fringe branch of the government that hasn't had activity in a while, or they have had activity, but they have been producing no results.
Right.
So that has led the government's decision to give Monarch one last chance to prove the existence of monsters, at least as far as we know, prove the existence of monsters other than the secret one that the government apparently doesn't want to share to Monarch about. And that's what else brings another question. Was Monarch developed before or after the nuclear bomb testing 54 incident? Because you see footage in 2014. You see Dr. Serizawa providing footage, documented footage of Godzilla's attack with the Monarch watermark laid over it. So I'm not sure if Monarch was there at the time of the 54 incident, or did they just got a hold of that footage years after the 54 incident and then put their watermark on it?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Again, throwing the comic out of the equation.
Yeah, but even without the comic, they do fairly well establish that Godzilla is an ancient creature in Godzilla 2014.
Yes.
And that he was around like pre-dinosaur times, or at least his species was around, kind of fighting the Mutos. So, they could do other things to backfill that in. Somebody pointed this out to me recently on Facebook, and I don't really know if I want to buy into this or not. But with the Hollow Earth idea coming up, and this is kind of more of a metafiction thing almost, with Legendary and Warner Brothers doing this, that you could conceivably have their horrible Clash of the Titans movies take place in the Monsterverse, and that it's kind of interesting, but you're like, oh, those movies sucked. But I'm like, oh, the monsters were kind of cool. But it was an interesting theory in that, like, okay, well, I suppose if you had, and again, I don't want to get to the end real quick with the post-credit scene, but if you did have ancient monsters still kind of around during the early days of, let's say, ancient Greece, and then these tales were sort of recorded, it might carry over, like that Monarch goes back sort of like the League of Shadows type of thing from our Batman reference. Been around for a long time, and maybe we're aware of this. Now, that's really taking a leap. But again, we do know Godzilla was around pre-dinosaur times. So if there were other monsters, which you think there would be, and I don't know if I necessarily said it in the Clash of the Titans, but if there was other monsters that had popped up throughout history, there could definitely have been a track record for some Monarch type of organization to have been formed.
Oh, yeah. And they have made some reference to that as well. In the opening credits of Godzilla 2014, you see a bunch of documented artistic renditions of monsters throughout the years. I'm not sure if when the movie was made, I'm not sure if that was supposed to imply that that's Godzilla being seen throughout time, or just like other monsters seen throughout time. Well, because it's established that Godzilla wasn't awakened until 54.
Right. Yes, that is absolutely true. And they do that again in Kong, where you get a few quick glimpses.
Yeah. Some
people are going crazy about the turtle, where it's a kaiju above it. Did you catch that?
Oh, no, I didn't, because unfortunately as of this recording, the movie's not released in Japan yet. It won't be released until March 25th. We're recording on March 16th, or for me, it's March 16th, almost 16th. And so I had to see, to quote the great Dr. Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park, life finds a way in terms of how I was able to view the movie. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to view like the best quality version of that movie.
Well, there's a very clear scene of sketch of a turtle, and above it, it's this kaiju, but it's one of those real quick flashes like the beginning of Godzilla 2014. So some people were trying to say, oh, they're getting Gamera, and I'm like, I think it might more be, and I just yesterday listened to your extended Monsterverse.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, and you guys have brought this up, it might have been, I'm going to say this wrong, Cambios from Space Amoeba?
Oh, Camebus. No, wait.
The turtle, whatever the turtle is in Space Amoeba.
Yeah, it was Camebus. I'm thinking of Ganymedes. Ganymedes was the crab. Camebus was Camebus was the turtle.
And the other interesting thing, and this is a very quick snap when you're first watching the film, is they show something in orbit that looks jellyfish-like, and I was like, "Oh, you just mentioned about Dogger on your
yeah
things." Like,
yeah, that'd be very crazy.
Yeah, I predicted it.
Out. Yes,
it would be cool. I was like, "Wow, Andres must have something going on there with his connection to the Monsterverse, I guess." So
yeah, of course. I'm totally buddies with the people at Legendary Pictures. They come to me for obscure references that no one will care about except us.
But
it was me all along, Austin.
But it certainly go back to the precedent of that the monsters have been around since ancient times, and people were aware of them in some capacity. So.
So I guess it might be convoluted at first, but it definitely takes when it comes to like the continuity of this Kong and Godzilla. But I guess with enough pointless fan speculation and head canons, I think it's possible to make sense out of this.
Yeah, and again, it's tough because there are only 2 movies in, and they've gone backwards in time instead of going forwards in time, which can be a little difficult. So, but I feel like they're developing it well. I feel like they took a definite step forward with this movie. I would definitely say if you're a kaiju fan, absolutely go see it. Would you agree with that? Like,
oh yeah, I definitely agree with that. Although I have seen people who have been disappointed with this movie, or kind of like very lukewarm about it, or just had a very meh reaction to it. And I've seen people who have reacted this way who are actual deep, Godzilla fans, or, fans of monster movies. So I think this is a particular style that could make or break it for you. If you're the individual, it's kind of like, it's a very subjective sort of deal. But then again, that's kind of like what most movies are. Yeah. Where if you're someone who isn't bothered by the idea of a movie with spectacle over deep characters, or you don't mind a movie that has a lot of great action, but the characters, they're not bad, right? They just do the part adequate enough to help support the action.
Yes.
Or like have a movie that's like more based on visual storytelling than anything dialogue based.
Right.
It's a very different approach to movies, and I think it was a conscious stylistic decision. And for me personally, and I feel like the same for you, this was a style that appealed to us, and it was something that we thoroughly enjoyed throughout.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you don't enjoy this sort of thing, or you were left wanting more, because I can see how people were left wanting more, because after I could see how people might come out of this feeling a bit empty, because some people, they want to have like a deep character arc, or something that's like a well-written character arc, or something that kind of has an overall moral lesson or something like that, or something to take away, something like deep and meaningful to take away from the movie. But the movie is rather very basic when it comes to that sort of stuff. It's kind of like the whole, don't let your anger consume you, don't let your obsessions get the better of you. Mankind learning their place among the humans, you can't control everything. Basic concepts like that we've seen in other movies. And it doesn't do anything new with that sort of message, but rather it, like, we mentioned with Pacific Rim, it just takes, just ideas we've seen in the past and just, raises the bar in terms of the popcorn entertainment sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And while not bastardizing those ideas and morals and sort of stuff, but just rather adequately retelling them, or adequately reutilizing them for a new generation.
And I think you hit the nail very much on the head when you said it was kind of like a 50s movie, where if you watch those classic 50s movies, none of the human characters really stand out. Like, I can't tell you one human character from The Beast of 20,000 Fathoms, right?
Right. Or, you just remember the Beast himself.
Right. Which
the Redosaurus.
Yeah, and it's not like any of the characters in that movie do a bad job in The Beast. They're all adequate for their role, which is kind of what you see here. Although, like you said, I do feel like John C. Reilly stood out a little bit more from everybody else.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
It's because it's definitely John C. Reilly himself. And from what I heard, he did a lot of what do you call it?
Improv.
Improv, yes, yes. He did a lot of improv, and it's very, John C. Reilly style improv.
Yeah.
And so that's another thing, a very subjective thing. Like, do you find it funny? Do you find it annoying? I've seen people on both sides. Me personally, I thought he was great, and he was hilarious.
And again, just so people haven't seen, I would have thought he's comedy relief going into the movie. And
yeah,
he's really maybe the most interesting character in the movie outside of Kong, I felt like. So.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess overall thoughts. Do you think this is a good movie, and would you recommend it?
I would very much recommend it, and I would score it, I'll do 2 scores. For a kaiju fan, I'd give it a pretty solid 9, I would say. Again, taking some away from the characters not being a little bit more developed. And for movie fans in general, I would say like a 7.5 to an 8. Like, I still think most movie fans would like this, unless, again, if you're looking for that very long character arc development. It's not going to be that. It's a fun...
Something that's more meaty.
Yeah, it's a fun popcorn flick. And for me, one thing that I owe for in particular in a kaiju movie is the rewatchability factor. And I would say this movie has a very high rewatchability factor, which... for instance, like I compared to the last time I saw Shin Godzilla, I absolutely love the movie. I thought the story was good, but I don't know if that has a higher rewatchability factor for me or not, because there's not a whole lot of like action scenes and stuff. It's a great drama, but
and a lot of dialogue.
Yeah, with a lot of dialogue, which was all
to
good,
pick through.
Yeah. But is it the type of thing that, like, on a Saturday, I'll just sit down and pop it in because I got?
Oh no, you got to be in a special mood for Shin Godzilla.
Right. This is the type of movie I feel like you can just put on and watch, or if you're coming halfway through it, you're still like, oh, cool, I'm just going to watch this from here on out because, like, it's fun and I don't have to worry about some big story. So, I would say I liked it very much so, and highly, highly recommend it. And one thing I kind of wanted to go over as I again doing more research is that I checked in on different Facebook groups, some kaiju groups, and specifically 2 Kong groups, and the kaiju groups were scoring it at about an 8. Like with how they thought about it, whereas the specific Kong groups are scoring it much higher, like a 9.5. So I found that was interesting, because there definitely is a group of Kong fans that are not necessarily Godzilla fans.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you've come across that or not, but there are certainly
not so much.
I certainly haven't. Like, one thing was interesting. I recently had found an article talking about should Pacific Rim join the Monsterverse. I put that in a couple different forums just to see. It was about 70% of people, just in general, Godzilla kaiju forums thought yes, and only about 30% in Kong forums thought that was a good idea, because they thought that was just taking even more towards being a I guess let's just say a kaiju film, whereas they feel like Kong may be more grounded in realism. I'm saying this with parentheses.
I can just tell because we have our cameras on. I can tell in the look in your face. Yeah. Just saying that you're like you know how contradictory that sounds.
But I just thought that was interesting that I found that, or it seems to be that there's this different core demographic of Kong fans that aren't necessarily Godzilla fans, but they responded even better than the overall kaiju fan was to this film. So if you're a Kong fan, it's almost a must-see.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And pretty much you took the words right out of my mouth. And pretty much I love this movie for all... No, I wouldn't say I love it. I'm very close to that, but I highly, highly, highly enjoyed this movie.
Yes, yeah.
I love the experience of watching it on my laptop in my apartment with the camera. Yeah. Or better yet, I found out that Japanese movie theaters have this thing called 4D.
Yeah, what is that? I've heard about it. I haven't seen it yet, though. I don't know if they have.
Have you ever been to like a 4D movie attraction at an amusement park, like Shrek 4D at Universal Studios?
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
It's exactly like that. Moving seats.
Wow.
Like water, wind, bubbles, everything.
It's gotta be great for this movie. I can only imagine.
Oh, yeah. I saw Doctor Strange because it came out like months after it came out in America. I saw it in 4D at a 4D movie theater. And, oh, Jesus Christ, it was goddamn expensive. I had to pay like $30 total.
Wow.
And that's not including my goddamn food.
Yeah. Oof. Doctor Strange better come out and shake your hand, man, for that much money.
Yeah. I expect Benedict Cumberbatch to just, just come out and give me a high five.
Yeah.
And take a selfie with me also. But, there is a reason why we could never have... I mean, we do have D-Box in American movie theaters, but it's very limited.
Yeah.
And I think we may have 3D and D-Box options. That's essentially 4D, but without the little water. Oh, even the seats vibrate. Like, so when you see, like, there's a fight scene and Doctor Strange, there are, like, punches being thrown, and you feel the vibration.
Oh. I can't imagine that'll be like when you see Kong, like, punching a hell.
Yeah. The only problem is that it's really difficult to eat your popcorn, to hold on to your popcorn as the scene is moving, like, oh, God damn, oh, No.
Makes popcorn flying all over people behind you, right?
No, I need this popcorn for justice. I can definitely see why 4D has not reached American theaters. I mean, there have already been people who have an immense dislike against 3D films in general, myself included, because I don't like forking over that extra cash.
Yeah,
IMAX, totally. 3D, I don't see as very essential. But 4D, for something like Kong, hell yeah.
Yeah, I kind of want to take a trip out to your place and see it. I'm going to jump on the next red eye and come out to Japan and hang out if that's cool.
It will be the only people in the movie theater, knowing how quiet and respectful Japanese audiences are, we'll be the only idiots there who will go like, yeah, woo!
As my goofy 6'3" self walks in there, right? Draw the attention.
You'll be the tallest one there, so like you'll be seen as Godzilla.
Yeah.
Like you walk into the movie theater, bum 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 bum.
The tallest and the clumsiest, I might add. So I'll probably trip over somebody,
You'll be knocking over things like model buildings.
It'll be great.
Yeah. Oh yeah, but so anyone in Japan who happens to be fluent in English who's listening to this podcast right now, definitely see it in 4D when it comes out on March 25th. So with my overall rating 4 out of 5.
Okay.
Very solid movie. Definitely rewatch it. Definitely own it. If you like big, crazy, over-the-top, nonsensical action roller coaster type of action movies, even if you're not a monster movie fan per se, but you love big, stupid, over-the-top action movies, this is definitely up your alley. And before we get into spoilers, I do want to ask you this, Matt. Where would you draw the line between big, dumb, goofy, entertaining fun and something like the Transformers movies? Because people have used like the descriptions we've made about King Kong, about Kong Skull Island being a dumb action movie. People have also used that to defend something like the Transformers movies, which have been seen in a more negative light, despite people claiming that it's another big, dumb, stupid action movie.
Well, I would think, I'm sorry, the difference here is sometimes when you're watching the Transformers movies, two things come into play, and that you can stretch your believability as far as story plot. Like the Transformers Age of Extinction, I was actually like hoping was going to be a good movie because like Dinobots, finally. But that story makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Like it's very hard to follow the plot line, almost to the point where I feel like you're almost being insulted watching the movie about like, you guys are dumb enough to buy this to see it. It's definitely not the way the Kong Skull Island is presented. It's not a very in-depth story, but at least it holds together in kind of its own, start to finish bubble.
So it has its own internal sense of logic that remains consistent for the most part.
Yeah, it does. It doesn't have these big gaping plot holes. And in Transformers, sometimes you get like action scenes that really don't seem to go with the story at all. I did not feel that was the case in Kong. And again, it's like, whereas they do very much set Kong up as a protector on the island, and he fills the role in this ecosystem of kind of keeping the skull crawlers in check. So it makes sense for him to kind of be, fighting skull crawlers. I never got like what the Dinobots were doing in Age of Extinction, or why Prime had to fight them in order to get them to work with him, type of thing. So I'm spoiling Age of Extinction for anybody who hasn't seen it. That's all you need to know. Don't go see it.
Yeah.
What do you think? I think much better story than the Transformers movies, and much more enjoyable than the Transformers movies.
I think so too. But yeah, I mean, there is a fine line between being dumb action, experiencing fun, dumb action, and then seeing like too dumb to enjoy, too dumb to be seen as fun.
Yes.
For me, I do love a healthy balance of both good stories, good characters, and good action. And you can easily do something that focuses on one area more than the others. Again, like Shin Godzilla, good movie, a lot of action. There is elements of action, story, characters.
Yes.
Not a lot on the story, not a lot on the action, but there's a lot of meat to the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the action, as small as it was quite outstanding.
Absolutely. Yes.
With Kong Skull Island, you've got, again, story, characters, and action. Good story, good, minimalistic characters, but then, then you have focus on the action.
Yeah.
So then, you got a healthy balance of them all equal, working in tangent with one another. Whereas with something like the Transformers movie, the story is, completely nonsensical, difficult to follow, which is kind of silly because you think a story about good robots versus bad robots would be easy to follow.
Seems
Characters, I don't like at all whatsoever. I don't like that style of writing.
Right.
I don't like that style of humor that they go with. So the stories suck, the characters suck, and the action, for my personal taste, it's difficult to follow.
Yes.
I mean, it's easy to see where like the brightly colored Autobots are. One's bright blue, one's red, one's yellow. But then when you look at the Decepticons, many of them, after the first film, just became faceless grunts.
Yeah.
So it's just a confusing mess about what's going on and what's happening where.
And one thing, again, talking about improving on with Skull Island from the previous film, well, I did like the fight scene at the end of Godzilla 2014. You very rarely got those sort of full shots of Godzilla and Mutos going at it. So you'd get like the perspective of somebody on the street seeing Godzilla bite him. In Kong Skull Island, it's almost all the full shots of the monsters going at it, which I thought was a huge improvement too. So you could follow the action very easily.
It's almost like when you first see Kong grabbing that helicopter, it's like he's grabbing the camera and moving it to his face. So like, I'm here.
Yeah, this is me. I am on the screen.
Yeah. Look at me. Look at me. Keep the damn camera on me. Yeah. So with that said, I do want to move into like a short little spoiler section to discuss anything that I'd like to discuss, especially the post-credit scene.
Yeah.
Before that, I do want to say that I was a bit disappointed. Well, okay, so yeah, spoilers. 3, 2, 1.
Good warning.
There we go. Unlike most YouTube film critics, I'm not gonna dedicate an entire episode to spoilers. So I was a little bit disappointed with the main Skullcrawler, simply because I thought that it, as cool as it was, I thought that it was too similar to the smaller Skullcrawlers we've seen.
I do agree. I thought he should have had a little bit more going on. He's just basically larger than the other Skullcrawlers we had seen, which makes sense in an ecosystem that it would be bigger. So I kind of get that, but even like within colonies, like the queen ant would look significantly different from the other normal worker ants. What I was hoping, and I'm glad you said queen, is the difference in the look between the queen and aliens versus the drone aliens. Something where the Skullcrawler not just larger but had extra legs or something else like that, similar to the alien queen.
It's got elbow spikes, but I think that's about it.
Yeah, it wasn't significantly different. If it had more appendages or
like a different colorization, maybe some spikes, maybe tusks or something.
Right.
A distinct different roar, maybe.
Right, because it's definitely set up not just as being like the oldest Skullcrawler. It's supposed to be something special and different. You know, the natives seem to be aware that there's this Skullcrawler that's much more dangerous than the other ones and seems to fill that queen type of role, like you had said, in a colony, and should be more different. Now, having said that, the final fight scene I thought was tremendous. So it does come across well there, but it could have been different. And I was slightly disappointed, and I was saying this for the spoiler section, that no other Toho monster popped up for Kong to take on.
And instead we kind of got like bootleg versions of like the giant octopus manga.
Yeah, like I really...
Makes me wonder that if we do get to see that turtle monster, that turtle kaiju, it's probably not going to be Gamera. It's going to be Magara.
Yeah, something like that.
Just switch the letters around and just call it a new monster.
Although I was really hoping when they started doing the whole Hollow Earth thing, I kept... And again, this doesn't really take away from the movie. It was just slightly disappointing it happened in Baragon. Like, how great would Baragon have been? So they established the Hollow Earth, right? And he'd, like... I figured Kong would take out the big Skullcrawler. I was hoping that'd be like the middle of the movie, and then there's something else out there, and at the end, Baragon just comes up. I mean, I would have jumped out of my seat and gone insane. And I feel like he would have fit very well, like living underground on Skull Island. They showed an oversized Triceratops-looking skull, so I kept thinking in the back of my head, like, oh, okay, so maybe that's way bigger than a normal Triceratops. Maybe this is Baragon's family. He's like the anti-Kong on this thing, if you will. But it didn't come to fruition, unfortunately.
Right. I guess maybe it's just a result of the marketing, but I felt like a lot of the movie was spoiled, especially the final scene, because I was actually hoping there was something more than just the big Skullcrawler.
In fact, it's my one not big, but the biggest disappointment I had with the film is that the trailers really did show...
Yeah, it made me thought that the big Skullcrawler was like the mid-level boss, like the T-Rex from the original Kong. And, And
I was hoping that Baragon or somebody else was going to pop up and be like the real villain or the main monster as we got further along, and that did not occur, unfortunately. Now, I know, although I think you could have used Baragon there, I know... there was some talk and sort of doing spoilers that Rodan might pop up on Skull Island, but given that we know Kong has to grow significantly in order to fight Godzilla, you really couldn't have any other monster appear there unless they were going to be juvenile as well, or else they're still going to be big enough to matter later.
Yeah. So you have to deal with a bunch of minor monsters first.
But again, don't you think Baragon perfect for that role, right? I mean...
Yeah, definitely. Who knows? Maybe we'll have another poorly written tie-in comic just showing that. Or
maybe that prequel that the director wants to do would be great, I feel like.
Oh, yeah, that'd be true. So, although I guess the reason why maybe Legendary has been hesitant so far on making direct monsters, going so far as to make their own spider monster, their own octopus monster, is probably because it's really... I would assume it's very expensive to get the movie rights to Godzilla himself and to eventually... So I think they were spending all their time focusing on getting Mothra, Rodan, and Ghidorah, as opposed to shelling out extra money for pointless monsters that are not as recognizable as those main three.
Yeah, I was just having this discussion with my wife last night, who's, of course, now become indoctrinated with everything kaiju, and that I said to her, like...
I am jealous of you.
Yeah. She's great, but I had said to her, like, if you weren't married to me... you would probably have an idea of who Mothra and Rodan and King Ghidorah were. She was like, yeah, before I knew you, like, she wasn't a fan, but she knew that Rodan was like a big pterodactyl. Yeah. I said, like, people talk about bringing in these other monsters, but to the general public, they're not going to know who they are from some other monster. So why would Legendary and Warner Brothers pay Toho
for a giant octopus?
Right. When you could just throw in some other octopus and not call it Odako or... start making your own monsters like they did with the Mutos and the Skullcrawlers. So, and I think like you said, you won't see, why would you pay to use the name of the monster from Space Amoeba when you could just have a big turtle, right? Like, you don't really need to pay the extra money when you could just have a big turtle. It's not like that huge of a deal. So
knowing as much as Godzilla fans love to say, oh, I want this monster and I want this monster, I want this monster and this monster and this monster, it's like, let's be realistic here, okay?
Yes.
like Legendary at the end of the day is probably going to spend all its time and energy and legal resources on acquiring like the big names.
Right.
And as overused as they have been in recent decades, I would still be very excited to see like an American Legendary interpretation of those characters.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you would get the CGI, you'd probably get more of the animalistic look to them than we've seen.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and especially in the case of Rodan, who has never really been portrayed as an anatomically correct pterosaur.
And as we get closer to the spoiler at the end, what did you think of it? I was...
I had a feeling that... do you recall when it was first announced that Mothra, Rodan, and Ghidorah were announced for Godzilla 2, and there was supposedly a teaser at like Comic-Con 2015, I believe?
Yeah.
I want to say that was the teaser minus the Kong Skull Island characters.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I think. I thought it was cool, but I was hoping to actually get at least photographs of the monsters instead of what we get are cave paintings, basically, which goes back to we're talking about the monsters been around for a while. But I was hoping to see, like at least a photo of Rodan in the sky or something. Like would have been,
or at least, especially King Ghidorah, because that is unlike anything that exists in real life. Other than again the Mutos and the Skullcrawlers, right. We've already established that we have these anatomically bizarre creatures that do not have any really like closest living relative. So I guess when you introduce something like the Mutos, which are like these reptilian insectoid hybrids, and these skull crawlers with 0 back legs, appendages, I guess anything is possible when it comes to biological monster designs, which I guess means that Ghidorah might not be an alien.
Yeah, I'm very curious about that, because, like I said, there wasn't one thing that looked like a jellyfish. It could have been Ghidorah in space, because it's very quick. Like, you have to catch it very quickly. But I'm curious if he'll be an alien or not. And I'm also curious about how they design him more than anything.
Oh, yeah.
Because I don't know if you've seen, like, I think it's been fan kind of sketch art where like, the wings kind of act like a dragon's wings where they can come down and box on them type. The wings act as arms. I've always wanted to see that with Ghidorah. Yeah, me too. I think that would be cool.
Yeah. I think that makes more sense, really.
Yeah, because this will be the first time we don't really need to see a puppet / man in suit Ghidorah. They can really do more of a CGI one. Have it move
like
more.
three-headed Smaug.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. And I've liked and the picture they show did kind of show that a little bit more of an elongated beak to Rodan, like you had said. We haven't really seen a Rodan portrayed as a pterosaur necessarily. Where I think this one will, and I'm sure you've seen it too. I don't know if it's real or not, but kind of that picture of the really long, almost like pelican-y bin build version.
Oh, yeah. I've seen I recently found the DeviantArt account, the artist who made those very realistic.
For your fans, I'm using my hands like they can see me as I do that.
Yeah.
I think that'll be cool too. I'm also interested to see, do you think they're going to do Mothra with like the big eyes or more like a traditional butterfly?
I want to say it might be, I forgot what the species is. Like, there's a particular species I've seen people do where whenever they recreate Mothra, they try to make the species into this particular type of moth, where it's like a very fluffy, very furry type of moth. Even like those, the antennas are very fluffy. I don't know what it's called, like a moonlight moth or something with moon or night in the name.
Well, So I was wondering, though, Mothra traditionally is set up as the big hero, if you will, of the Godzilla franchise. And in a lot of cases, maybe even sort of like the anti-King Ghidorah. So I do find it interesting that the organization that's tracking these monsters has called themselves Monarch, and that they look to protect...
yeah. I'm not sure if Monarch was meant to be like a reference to like a monarchy, or like the actual butterfly itself.
So it kind of works on both, but I'm almost wondering if they don't know that Mothra is going to have to be the thing that they need to count on to help protect them, and that's why they took the name Monarch, and they might portray Mothra as more of a monarch butterfly going forward.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, just Just throwing that theory out there too. But it was cool, and it was the end scene, and it was good to hear the Godzilla roar at least.
Yeah, definitely. And so I can definitely tell. When I see that movie in theaters, I'm gonna annoy the hell out of a bunch of Japanese audience attendees. Where I'm gonna watch that. I'm going to see that the thing in HD, because for whatever reason, like the bootleg version that I watched, they always cut out when the credits begin.
Oh.
So I had to look I had to look on YouTube for someone to poorly record it.
Oh.
And so just when I see all of that in HD, I'm on the screen in 4D, I'm going to be like screaming my head off. I'm like, yeah!
Yeah, it was very cool, man. And it was very neat to put that in there. So, and it definitely set up neat for the next film. Now, here's the other question I have. Since they're kind of skipping around in time, and Ghidorah is definitely set up as the big bad, do you think that even though it takes place in 2020 our time, that Kong versus Godzilla will actually take place in the Monsterverse prior to Godzilla 2? Because I almost feel like it's a little anticlimactic, and I hate to use Batman versus Superman as the template, but because they squeeze too much in there. But to me, it makes more sense to have the heroes fight, and then the big bad in Doomsday shows up. Oh, we have to work together.
That's like the basic template for all crossover fights.
Right.
I don't know if Ghidorah, because for many people have speculated that Mothra, Ghidorah, and Rodan will all be in Godzilla King of the Monsters.
Yeah.
But other people would think that it's kind of silly and or not very wise to shove in all those characters in one movie. So, even when Toho did it, they at least introduced Mothra first before incorporating Rodan and Ghidorah.
Right. It would be... well, they introduced Rodan too, right? Because Rodan had his own solo film before Ghidorah.
Right. But I mean, like, introducing Mothra in the Godzilla series.
Got you. Right. So,
so you're right. They even then they introduced Rodan in a separate film altogether. So I'm thinking maybe they could save Rodan. They could save Ghidorah for Godzilla vs. Kong in 2020.
And then kind of take that same arc of they fight together and then they have to work together maybe to say. I almost think... Maybe, yeah. I don't know if story-wise that would be better. I don't know, because I don't know if I want to straight up remake of... is that... Can you hear that? In the background?
Yeah.
It's my kid's taking a shower, leaving the door. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's happened to me so many times.
Yeah.
I've done that to my poor father.
My wife is
poetry. It rhymes.
Go on in a minute.
All right.
So
because you could have lied. You could have said that was like the kaiju alert or something.
Oh, okay. We'll go with that. Yeah, that's a Tom.
Yeah.
Down my street right now.
Right. So you got to pilot Steel Samurai right now.
Yeah, I'll be back.
Yeah. My people need me. Dun 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 dun. So, anything else to mention before we wrap things up?
No, just I think if you're a fan and you haven't seen this movie, go see it. Even with the information that we've given you, it's still a lot of fun to check out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, at the end of the day, where can people find you, Matt?
Well, as always, you can find me on Facebook at Matt Dennion as kind of my personal one, but I always reply to people there. Matthew Dennion is my author page. Also at www.matthewdennion.com, and Matthew is Matthew, Dennion, Dennion. I've also just gotten on Twitter, so I'm getting better at that. If people want to follow me, I think I know when I tweet them back or whatever. So I'm there. And on Instagram as well. And all my books are available through my website, on Severed Press, on Amazon, and I'm usually featured in GFan. I just did an interview for them too, and I still have a few more stories there as well coming out. So I'm all over the place. And like you said, if not, just look up in the sky for Steel Samurai. I'm usually flying around looking for any stray monsters to take out. So, that's where I'm at.
Excellent, and I'll leave all the important links in the comments below, and I'll even throw in an Amazon link for your most popular book, Atomic Rex, because if anyone hasn't seen that book, definitely check that one out.
You. Yeah.
And if you like Kong, I have yet to check out Polar Yeti, but I've been meaning to, but I will say definitely check out Chimera if you enjoy King Kong type of stories.
And real quick, you will be seeing Atomic Rex take on Chimera in my next novel. So that is coming just because Severed Press really wants it. So we're doing it. So
right. So Atomic Rex, he just really likes to pick fights with all your other characters.
Oh, he does. He does. And it's, and honestly, and I say this with complete references because of my fans, I really only had an idea to do one Atomic Rex book, and people kept coming back to me with, you got to do more Atomic Rex. So I was like, okay. And then I was like, well, what am I going to do with them now? So, okay, we'll just fight everybody else.
Just have him beat up all your other poor characters.
He's like my Kong Skull Island movie very much, actually, where I'm just like, we'll just have...
He's like, bring it on.
Yeah.
All right, then. So thank you very much, Matt, for joining me in this collaborative review for Kong Skull Island. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to us for the last 20, 30, 40, however long we've been going at this minutes.
90.
90? Oh, wow. Okay. So, as always, I am Andres Perez, a.k.a. Kaiju Noir.
And I'm Matthew Dennion. Kaiju.
And until next time, sorry?
Kaiju author. Sorry. I let a little space go there. Just for...
It's all right. And, Kaiju Noir meets Kaiju author in this awesome hour-and-a-half review. So until next time, everybody, take care.